Why was the tomb of Prince Cihangir considered forbidden? What truths did the Ottoman Empire attempt to conceal following his death? Was his delicate health the true reason for his demise? Or was it the overwhelming grief from his brother Mustafa's execution that ultimately destroyed him? What secrets did his heart hold that not even the power of his father, Suleiman the Magnificent, could heal? Is there a link between his tomb and a love story that was never told? Why was his memory silenced and his final resting place nearly forgotten? Stay until the end, because behind the frail figure of Cihangir lies a human tragedy so profound, it still moves those who uncover it today. In the heart of one of history's most formidable empires, a prince was born who did not fit the mold of Ottoman heirs. His name was Şehzade Cihangir, the son of the Ottoman Empire's greatest sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent, and his favorite wife, the influential Hürrem Sultan. However, from the moment of his birth, Cihangir's life was defined not by ambition or warfare, but by fragility, sensitivity, and the shadow of a tragedy that would seal his destiny. Cihangir was born with a physical deformity, a congenital hump on his back that he would carry throughout his life. In an empire where the ideal prince was a strong warrior, fit to command armies and rule vast territories, Cihangir did not seem destined for the throne. But what he lacked in physical strength, he more than made up for in intelligence, humanity, and emotional depth. It was said that he was cultured, gentle, and observant, with a special passion for poetry, philosophy, and art. Some chroniclers of the time described him as the wisest among Suleiman's sons, a young man who understood power not through the sword, but through the mind. He was more of a spectator than a player in the fierce rivalry between his brothers for the throne. Yet, what truly defined his life was the bond he shared with his half-brother, Şehzade Mustafa, the eldest son of Suleiman. Mustafa was strong, brave, and beloved by the army. Although Mustafa was not Hürrem's son, Cihangir felt a sincere and deep affection for him, perhaps even seeing him as an ideal of what he himself could never be, the rightful heir adored by the people. While the other princes prepared for power, Cihangir seemed only to seek peace. He did not aspire to the throne, lead campaigns, or conspire. He was the prince who watched, who thought, who felt. In a court dominated by intrigue, this made him a unique figure, but it also made him vulnerable. Vulnerable to pain, to emptiness, and to loss. And when tragedy struck his brother Mustafa, his inner world shattered. Cihangir was different, not just in his body but in his soul. And perhaps that is why his story resonates to this day. Because in the midst of an empire of iron, he was flesh, heart, and tears. The Ottoman Empire, in all its magnificence, was built on pillars of power and on decisions as cruel as they were irreversible. One of those decisions would forever change the life of Şehzade Cihangir, the execution of his brother Mustafa. He was the army's favorite prince, the natural heir in the eyes of the people, and for Cihangir, his greatest emotional anchor. Mustafa was the son of Sultan Suleiman and Mahidevran, his concubine before Hürrem. From a young age, Mustafa was groomed to be the future sultan. He was brave, charismatic, and admired by the Janissaries. But his own brilliance became his curse. Hürrem Sultan, Cihangir's mother, saw him as a threat to her own sons and worked relentlessly to plant seeds of distrust in Suleiman's mind. The tension grew for years, and in the year 1553, Suleiman made a heartbreaking decision. He ordered Mustafa's execution on suspicion of conspiracy. The scene was brutal. Mustafa went to his father's camp, believing he would be received with honor, but instead, the executioner's rope awaited him. When Cihangir received the news, his world fell apart. For many historians, that execution was not just a political tragedy, but a devastating emotional blow for the young prince. Although Mustafa was not his full brother, Cihangir loved him as one. In him he saw strength, balance, and hope. His loss was not just a death, it was a betrayal to Cihangir's heart. Already in poor health since childhood, the emotional shock was too much to bear. Some chroniclers of the era claim that Cihangir fell into a deep depression, refusing to eat or receive medical care. His health deteriorated rapidly. He died just weeks after Mustafa's execution. And while official records cite illness, many believe that what truly killed him was the unbearable pain of losing his brother. Can someone truly die of sorrow? In Cihangir's case, history seems to say yes. He was the only prince who was not murdered for ambition or killed in battle. His death was silent yet shattering. It was the emotional wound that showed that even in an empire of steel, broken hearts could not be mended with power. And with that death, the figure of Cihangir became a symbol of brotherly love that could not survive imperial politics. After the death of Cihangir, which occurred shortly after the tragic execution of his brother Mustafa, an uncomfortable silence fell over the Ottoman court. He did not die in battle or at the center of a conspiracy. His passing was so emotionally devastating that it became a topic few dared to address openly. But the greatest mystery was not his death, but what happened to his tomb. Historical records state that his body was buried in Istanbul, on a hill that gives its name to the modern district of Cihangir, in his honor. A small mosque and mausoleum were built there, supposedly as a tribute from his father, Sultan Suleiman, who was moved by remorse. However, something doesn't add up. Unlike the grand mausoleums of other Ottoman princes, Cihangir's is small, modest, and lacks imperial decorations. Why? Why would such a beloved son receive such an austere burial? Some historians argue that the real reason was Suleiman's guilt. Cihangir's death, so close to Mustafa's execution, was seen as a divine punishment, a spiritual consequence. The chronicles say that Suleiman fell into a deep sadness after losing both sons in such a short time. The mausoleum, then, was not a celebration, but a quiet act of penance. Others go even further, suggesting that the current site may not be his actual tomb. Theories propose that Cihangir was buried secretly in another location to avoid visits, tributes, or even symbolic revolts in his name. A forbidden tomb, not because it is physically sealed, but because it represents the pain, guilt, and the most human side of an empire that did not tolerate emotional fragility. Today, Cihangir's mausoleum is forgotten by many. It is not a major tourist destination or a place of pilgrimage. It stands there, much like his story. Silent, discreet, almost hidden, but painfully present for those who choose to look beyond the marble. Cihangir's tomb is not imposing, but it holds a great truth. That power does not always protect, that sadness can kill, and that the love between brothers can be as strong as any army. The story of Şehzade Cihangir was not completely erased, but it was carefully silenced. Unlike other Ottoman princes, whose military feats or political tragedies filled pages of imperial records, Cihangir's memory was relegated to brief, almost symbolic mentions. The reason was that his life represented something the empire preferred not to show: vulnerability, sensitivity, and guilt. In an imperial culture that glorified strength, control, masculine duty, and absolute obedience to the throne, Cihangir was the uncomfortable exception. His hump was not just a physical condition. It became a symbol of his difference. He did not wage war. He did not aspire to lead armies. He did not conspire like his other brothers. He simply observed, felt, and thought. And for the official narrative of an empire of conquerors, that was not enough. But the most troubling part was not his body. It was his heart. Cihangir broke after Mustafa's death. He was one of the few who did not hide his pain. In the marble palaces, where laments were synonymous with weakness, he showed humanity. He died of grief, and that simply did not fit the image the dynasty wanted to project. Furthermore, his story reminded everyone of a crime that could not be justified: the execution of Mustafa, the people's favorite son. To remember Cihangir was to remember Mustafa. And to remember Mustafa was to confront the most devastating error of Suleiman the Magnificent. That is why his story was downplayed, why his tomb was modest, why his legacy was silenced. Only in the most intimate Ottoman literature, in some poems and travelers' accounts, does his figure appear as the prince of the wounded soul, the wise child, the faithful brother, the reflection of an empire that did not know how to care for the most delicate thing it had. And so, the name of Cihangir became an echo, a soft, pained human echo that still resonates today in those who seek the truth behind the cold marble of official history. The death of Şehzade Cihangir did not just close the chapter of a sickly, quiet young prince. It opened an emotional crack within the mighty apparatus of the Ottoman Empire. His departure left a more lasting mark than many military victories, an unhealed emotional wound that questioned the very humanity of those who ruled. Over time, Cihangir's story became more than a historical fact. It transformed into a myth, a symbol of brotherly love, lost innocence, and repressed sorrow. In him, poets saw the portrait of a sensitive soul that did not survive the brutality of power. In him, later chroniclers found a tragic figure who reminded the Ottomans and the world that the true cost of power is not always measured in conquests, but in broken hearts. Many believe that Cihangir died of sadness, not of plague nor poison nor by decree. He died because his soul could not bear the weight of injustice, betrayal, and loss. And that made him something more powerful than a victorious general. It made him a historical conscience. His tomb, silent and humble, represents more than his body. It is an altar to the love between brothers, to unconditional loyalty, to a grief that not even the greatest power in the world could soothe. And his name, though silenced in the official books, lived on among those who could see beyond the crowns and swords. Because Cihangir was not forgotten. He was hidden. And today, when we remember him, we unearth not just a prince, but an uncomfortable truth. That in the grandest empire in the world, even the noblest could be victims of love and pain.